Okay, let's just jump right in. We've all done it, right? You zip up a folder of photos, you download a software update, or you send a document that's somehow magically smaller than the original. It really does feel like a little bit of digital wizardry, shrinking files down without losing a single pixel or a single character. But how on earth does it actually work? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on that unseen squeeze, lossless data compression.
And this is really the core question, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing to make a file smaller by just throwing away information. That's what lossy compression does with JPEGs or MP3s. But lossless is a whole different beast. It makes a promise, a perfect round trip. That 10 megabyte file gets squished down to 4 megabytes, and when you unzip it, you get back the exact same 10 megabytes, bit for bit. How is that even possible?
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the basics, then uncover the big secret that makes it all work. We'll explore the absolute speed limit of compression, look at a really elegant classic solution, see how other methods take it to the next level, and finally, we'll talk about the one type of file that you just can't compress.
All right, first things first. Let's make sure we're all on the same page about what lossless actually means.
The key phrase here, the one that matters most, is perfectly reconstructed. You know, think of it like this. You disassemble a giant piece of IKEA furniture, you pack it into a tiny little box to move, and then on the other end, you reassemble it with every single screw, every single panel, right back in its original spot. Absolutely nothing is lost. And this is so crucial for things like text documents or software code, where changing even a single bit would be a total catastrophe.
So, if we're not throwing any data away, how do the files actually get smaller? Well, the answer lies in finding and eliminating something that most of our data is absolutely full of: redundancy.
Real-world data is, let's be honest, beautifully inefficient. In the English language, the letter E pops up way more often than Z. In a picture of a clear blue sky, you have thousands, maybe millions of pixels that are all basically the same color. In your favorite song, musical phrases repeat. All of these patterns, all of this repetition, that's redundancy. And that's exactly what compression algorithms are built to hunt down.
Now, this is a really important distinction to make. Compression itself just means making something smaller. That's it. Removing redundancy is the how. It's the specific tool, the technique that these lossless algorithms use to get the job done. They find the patterns, and then they create a much more efficient shorthand to describe them.
But how far can you take this? Is there a limit? Can you just keep squeezing a file smaller and smaller forever? Well, the answer is no. There's a theoretical maximum squeeze, and it's defined by one of the most important ideas in all of information theory.
Okay, to put it simply, entropy is just a measure of surprise, or unpredictability. A text that's super repetitive, like cat, 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 has really low entropy. You can guess what's coming next. But a string of perfectly random numbers, that has super high entropy. Every single digit is a total surprise. The genius Claude Shannon proved that you literally cannot compress a file to be smaller than its actual information entropy. That's the finish line. Every compression algorithm out there is just trying to get as close to that line as possible.
So, theory is great and all, but how do we actually do this? Let's look at one of the very first, and maybe one of the most beautiful, methods for getting close to that entropy limit. It's called Huffman coding.
And you gotta love the origin story. It's 1951, David Huffman is just a grad student at MIT, and his professor gives the class a choice. You can either take the final exam, or you can write a term paper on finding the most efficient way to encode data. So Huffman gets to work. He's about to give up and just study for the exam when, bam, he has a breakthrough. He solves the very problem that his own professor was stuck on.
So how did he do it? Well, the first step is brilliantly simple. You just count how many times every character shows up in your file. That's it. As you can see here in this example, the space character is the most common. A and E are tied for second, and then a bunch of other characters are way more rare. This simple frequency list is all the algorithm needs to get started.
Now, Huffman's real genius was to build his encoding system, a tree structure, from the bottom up. You start with every character as its own little leaf. Then you just find the two with the lowest frequency, the rarest ones, and you combine them into a new branch. Then you do it again. Find the two lowest on the list, combine them. And you just keep repeating that over and over until you're left with just one single tree.
And this is the beautiful result. Once the tree is built, you just trace the paths down from the top to generate a new binary code for each character. And look at this, it's perfect. The most common character, the space, gets a super short 3-bit code. But the rare characters like L and X, they get much longer 5-bit codes. By using fewer bits for the stuff you see all the time, the average size of the whole file just plummets. That right there is compression.
Huffman coding is a genius way to exploit how often individual characters pop up. But what about bigger patterns? Like repeated words or whole phrases? Well, let's move on and see how other algorithms handle that.
So you've basically got two big families of compression. On one side, you have entropy coders like Huffman, which work on one symbol at a time. But on the other side, you have dictionary coders, like the Limpel-Ziv algorithms. These are the engines behind zip files and GIFs. Instead of counting single letters, they look for entire strings of text they've seen before. When they find a match, they don't rewrite it, they just stick in a tiny little pointer that basically says, hey, just copy the 15 characters that we saw 200 bytes ago. It's incredibly efficient.
Okay, now some algorithms get even sneakier. They don't just find the patterns that are already there, they actually shuffle the data around to create better, more obvious patterns before they even start compressing. A fantastic example of this is the Burrows-Wheeler transform. It can take a string that looks kinda complex, like this one,
And it turns it into this. Just look at that. It's the same letters, but now all the identical ones are grouped together in these long, easy-to-compress runs. This new string is an absolute piece of cake for a simple algorithm to shrink down, because the redundancy is just sitting right there on the surface. It's a brilliant trick, a pre-processing step used in tools like BizZip2.
With all of these incredible techniques, you'd think we could shrink just about anything. But that brings us to our final, and maybe the most mind-bending part of this whole story, the file that simply can't be compressed. So here's the ultimate question. What happens when a file has no patterns? If you have a file that is truly perfectly random, with zero statistical redundancy for an algorithm to grab onto, can you still make it smaller?
The answer, believe it or not, comes from a simple but incredibly powerful idea from math, the pigeonhole principle. It basically just states the obvious. If you have 10 pigeons but only 9 pigeonholes, at least one of those holes has to have more than one pigeon in it. It's just simple counting, but it has huge implications for data compression.
And here's how that applies. Think of all the possible 10-bit files as your pigeons. Then, think of all the possible files that are smaller, all the 9-bit files, 8-bit files, and so on, as your pigeonholes. There are way more pigeons than there are holes. So the math says that for any compression algorithm, if it successfully makes even one file smaller, it must, by definition, make some other file larger. You just can't fit everything into a smaller space without something getting bigger. It's a mathematical certainty.
So, let's wrap this up. What have we learned? First, lossless compression isn't some kind of magic. It's all about math. Second, it works by hunting down patterns, that redundancy, and finding a clever shorthand for them. Third, different algorithms are just different kinds of hunters, designed to find different kinds of patterns. And finally, because of that pesky pigeonhole principle, a truly random file, one with no patterns at all, simply cannot be made smaller.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If you run a file through a compression program and it fails to get any smaller, does that mean the file is truly fundamentally random? Or could it just be random to that algorithm? Could there be some deeper, more complex pattern hidden inside that we just haven't invented the right tool to see yet?